First and foremost, thank you so much for the invitation to come to Tucson. I really appreciate it, and thank you for allowing me the freedom to kind of talk about whatever wild and crazy thing I came up with. So thank you, Lori, and thank you, Elaine, for that. You may be asking yourself, why are we talking about the Summer Olympics just after the Winter Olympics and 2 years away from the Summer Olympics? And the answer is quite simple. It's because I really, really, really like the Summer Olympics. And every time I go through the Winter Olympics, it's fine, but I really just care about the Summer Olympics. I was obsessed with gymnastics as a child. I looked as a child very similar to the way that I look today, which is why I was never a gymnast. They said that I would be a very good football player who could watch the gymnastics, but I couldn't tumble, I couldn't cartwheel, I couldn't even handstand. What I could do, however, was practice the vault run. So if you're familiar with the vault run, I want you to imagine me maybe 4 foot tall, probably about 170. And I would be sitting in my backyard and I would just imagine hearing the beep, salute the audience, salute the judges, focus on the vault, a women's event, by the way, focus on the vault. And then I would lift one leg and then go into my run. And then at the very end, I would hop. And then I would again salute the judges and receive my medal. I would do this for hours in my backyard. The reason why I love the Olympics is because it's not just about what the final event is and what happens at the very end. There's all these wonderful, marvelous stories that are all built into it. So let's talk a little bit about how this connects with the wacky world of assessment and storytelling. I love storytelling. I care a lot about storytelling. My undergraduate degree is in mathematics because I got confused and I didn't know what we were supposed to major in. So I just said, I like math. I'll just do that. I'm a 4th generation math professor. And so it just made sense. But then I started thinking about what I really wanted to do. And so then I got a master's degree in performance poetry because I was terrified of being employable. And then after getting that degree, I realized that I had spent quite a bit of time just studying learning and basically preparing for standardized tests. So I'm very good at standardized tests. It's after that that I finally found this idea that I could be in higher education, talking about the things that mattered, talking about learning in these different ways. And that's when I pursued my PhD in educational administration, focusing on the experiences of veterans. I'm not a veteran, but I taught at a community college and a lot of my students were veterans, which brought me to kind of that point of applying critical theory to the experiences of veterans. When we talk about Olympics, one of the things that is fascinating to me is it is one of the world's largest stage for story. And I think it's really important that we think about how the Olympics tell their stories as we think about how we tell our own stories, regardless of what story we're telling. So we have 100+ years of storytelling, 3 billion global viewers. One of the things that I love is watching the Olympics from different countries because they will only focus on the things that they are good at. So I work at a small camp in the French Alps every summer. And when I go, it's often during the Summer Olympics. And so all that you can see about the Olympics in France is handball and fencing. Handball and fencing are like the main events in France. They're also quite good at swimming and diving in the last couple Olympics. The global stage forces incredible clarity. And I really love this idea of emotion beyond just exposition. Instead of just saying, this is what we did, and now we're done, I told you the story, it really digs into understanding why that story should matter to you. My slides are incredibly heavy by design. Every time I speak in front of faculty members, they're like, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to do that. I know, I'm fully aware, but I like heavy slides and I'll pass these on later on. I like giving people things to think about later on after our conversation. One of the challenges that I've found in years of doing assessment work, I've been in the assessment game, if we want to call it a game, for about 25 years now, is assessment, it rarely has a quality problem, it has a storytelling problem. I was working at Howard University, specifically working with our electrical engineers who really love assessment. If you want to know someone who really loves assessment, it's your engineering faculty. Are there any engineering faculty in here so I can pick on you? Perfect. One of the challenges that I found was that they were very, very good about collecting data, very, very bad about doing anything with that data to tell other people about what was going on. So I met with the department chair at Howard, and we started talking about what they did with their data. And they went through this whole process of, I gathered information, I gathered it from all the faculty, I gathered information on our students and our graduating students, and then I put them in a binder, and that binder is on a shelf. And he pointed to the shelf. And I said, that's incredible, your organization is impeccable. Now, after you gather all of that data, what do you do with that data? And he looked at me for a second, and then he looked up at the shelf, and then he looked back at me, and very slowly, as though I didn't understand him the first time, we put it in a binder on the shelf. Okay. And that was the answer that I needed. They were scared. They didn't know how. They didn't have the tools necessary to say what was going on in their classrooms. All they were doing was capturing information because ABET was coming. Right? And we love talking about accreditation agencies as though they're on the doorstep, right? You know, HLC is coming, WASC is coming, CCNE is coming, CSWE is coming. All these letters just waiting in the bushes as we approach our doors. I understand your work is complex. There's a lot going on, and it makes it very difficult to tell those stories. The evidence that you have that you are providing is real. You're not doctoring these things or making them up, but without the context, it doesn't make it particularly meaningful. Your outcomes must be meaningful. And the problem with a lot of assessment is the real story gets lost. And so all we see is, as we saw earlier, maybe a slide deck that said 100% of students did this thing. Great. That's helpful. 100% of students met or exceeded my expectation. Great. That's fascinating. Congratulations. It's not compelling. And it's not compelling as you talk about using that for improvement. I asked Elaine to make sure that I was aware of time, because what she knows is, luckily for you, the only thing I like better than talking is eating. And so she specifically was like, you have 30 minutes and get out of here. I'm going to go through some stories relatively quickly. If I had my druthers, we would talk about Olympic moments for the next 3 hours. When I go to sleep, some people will watch a YouTube video or TikTok or things like that. I will just replay Olympic moments. Not joking. This is how I go to sleep. I love them. I understand that when you tell your story, you're telling it to a variety of people in a variety of different ways. One of the things that I love about the Olympics is whether you are an 8-year-old practicing your vault routine in the backyard, or you are an Olympic gymnast yourself, the Olympics matter. And you are compelled by the story of the Olympics. One of the things that I think is important that I often told my doctoral students is, when you're talking about your subject matter, you need to be able to be in a room of experts who have written the papers that you are citing and speak with authority and confidence. You also need to tell this to a 7-year-old and keep their attention. And until you can do both, you are not an expert in your field. And you need to work towards that. One of the things that assessment folks struggle with is, we can talk to people who like assessment about our assessment. We can talk about the things that we're doing in this room. Now, can we take this same conversation out there and find those students who are sitting by the bench and get them excited about it? Because that's when we can truly tell the story of what's going on in our classroom. So I'm going to give you a few different Olympic moments that are some of my top favorites. Everyone knows that a story is, this character, conflict, and payoff. We were taught this when we were young. We were given this arc. We were told that this is what a story must be. One of the things that I think is often missing is people talking about that resolution or transformation that should resonate. So we say they did this and then this happened, and that's where it ends. And so I hope what you see in some of the examples that I give is that resolution, that future looking. One of the stories that I really love is Kathy Freeman, who was a 400-meter runner. She actually was one of the torchbearers at the Sydney Games, and this was going to be her last run. She was done after this. She, at the Commonwealth Games in '94, won, and then she wore both the flag of Australia as well as an Aboriginal flag. And it was met with great concern. She isn't doing what she's supposed to do. She's supposed to only be representing Australia. This isn't right. And people came at her in social media. People came at her on the news, things like that. This was '94, so social media was like MySpace, but they were there. They were there. When she won again in the 2000 Sydney Olympics, she brought both of the flags, put both of them on, and it was met with this celebration of this person who was doing something that meant something important for two different kinds of people and celebrated both parts of who she was. The reason that I think this is really important is when we talk about assessment, if anyone's ever been to an assessment conference, half of the assessment sessions will say, is it for compliance or improvement? This is the important thing. Now, half of the sessions are about AI. So it's either, is it compliance or improvement, or how are we going to use AI to do it? I love Kathy Freeman's story as a representative of what we're doing in the world of assessment, because we really should be wearing both of those flags and proudly wearing both of those flags. Yes, it's okay to say that we're doing this for some level of compliance, because all compliance is institutional storytelling, and we are contributing to institutional storytelling. Has anyone ever seen the video of this? Derek Redmond. He's a 400-meter runner as well. This was in the 1992 Barcelona Games. He was in a heat right before the finals, and he tore his hamstring in the middle of a race. Many people have seen this video because it's been used countless times again, specifically about courage and perseverance and things like that. One of the things that I think is important to note is that if you were assessing Derek Redmond, what would you give him? If the evaluation was winning. On paper, Derek Redmond is listed as did not complete, because his father actually came on the track and helped him walk around one more round to a standing ovation. So on paper, it's did not complete. In practice, it's one of the most treasured stories of Summer Olympic history, right? Talking about what sacrifice is, what family is, and moving forward. And I encourage you and challenge you as you think about your own stories, thinking about the students behind those stories, and it might be did not complete, but there's a deeper story there, and what happens next? Derek Redmond was told he would never run again in the same way, competitive way. And so, what do you do when you can't run? You become a professional basketball player, and then you play in the Olympics again, but for basketball. So don't cry for Derek. Derek's fine. Michael Phelps. Everyone's familiar with Michael Phelps. Again, if you look at the documentation of Michael Phelps, all it is he's really good at swimming. It doesn't tell the larger stories of how he was told his whole life he would never be successful because he could never focus on swimming and overcoming that. The thing that I love about Michael Phelps' story is that the data proves that it's done. But the story is so much more interesting. Really digging into that story is so much more interesting. So just recognizing that he is an incredible swimmer. People talk about how his arms are longer than they should be. I actually have similarly proportioned arms to Michael Phelps because I was born as an albatross, but both figuratively and literally, like metaphorically, because I'm a burden to my family, but a harbinger of what's to come. But I think it's important to recognize that those data points are not particularly interesting unless you put them in the context of the person and all of the other things that you know about the situation. And that's why I'm always really compelled when people want to tell about assessment narratives instead of give assessment reports. I understand that numbers matter. I like numbers. But being able to truly say what those numbers mean and why those numbers matter and how they compare to prior years. I worked at Howard for 4 years. I am a compliance-oriented assessment professional. I am floss before the dentist. Institutions have never hired me more than 18 months before an accreditation visit. My job is to clean up your closets, get your house in order, and I have been successful in helping institutions across the finish line. My problem was that I cared so much about compliance, I forgot that there was a story there. And so after finishing compliance, because I really wanted us to be compliant, I was there for 2.5 more years. And what I did is I still had them write the reports because Middle States really likes reports. But every week I would interview a new faculty member and I would ask them 3 questions. What is something interesting that you've done recently in your classroom? Second question, why did you do it? Third question, what happened? And that became these assessment narratives that we would post online and talk about, because those stories are really compelling. An encouragement to those of you who are working with faculty who are pushing back on assessment, ask those 3 questions and you will find some really, really, really good assessment and work backwards. This one is probably more familiar with folks. If you are not familiar with Carrie Strug, I highly recommend you check out the college band Haywood. They have a song called the Carrie Strug song. The lyrics begin, "It all started one steamy day down in Atlanta. Coke owned the entire world, but the Germans were drinking Fanta. It was the Olympic Games. They were going to start manana. Every Russian athlete there was named Svetlana." It's a wonderful song, and I highly recommend it. The thing that I love about Carrie Strug's story, and if we had more time, I would make you watch a 15-minute video about this. And if you have not recently watched a 15-minute video on Carrie Strug, I highly recommend you do it. As the story goes, they were competing with the Romanians and the Russians for the team all-around gold. The Russians and the Romanians had always won it. The US had never won this trophy before. Dominique Moceanu, does that name ring a bell to anyone? She was very famous for doing Devil Went Down to Georgia on her floor routine. And when she got up to vault, she fell twice. So they were positioned in a way that they were neck and neck with the Russians, and the Russians were about to do their floor routine, which they were very, very good at. The Russian gold medalist on floor was on their team event. And all they needed to do was get an 8.3 average for the Russians, and then they would have beat them. So it wasn't in the bag, but all 4 of the 5 competitors for the US had also gotten above an 8.3. So they were like being pretty friendly with the floor routines. Carrie Strug got like a 9.2, and it was going to be enough for them to be okay based on what the Russians were going to do. The only way that she could seal it was to run again. For those of you who are not familiar, she ran, she landed, she hurt her ankle. She ran back, started kicking her foot out like this, trying to get blood into her ankle. And then she ran again, much like I did in my backyard. It was very, very similar. I base my moves off of Kinzamescal. It's an age thing. When she ran, flipped, and then stuck the landing, she did her salute to the judges on only 1 foot because she couldn't apply pressure on her ankle anymore. That is the reason where they sealed the gold medal, because then it didn't matter what anyone else in the competition did. I say that to say that if we were judging Carrie Strug, it was not perfect. She did not get a 10.0 and the crowd went wild, right? It was very average for her, a below average vault, but it was enough for the team to move forward. And I think it's important as we think about assessment, as we think about our classrooms, as we think about specifically the students in our classroom, we want excellence because we want them to challenge themselves. But that excellence is in the context of a lot of other things that are happening in their worlds. And I think it's important as we assess those things and capture our information, that we're not afraid to recognize what is enough and what is excellent and what is not enough, not only for their goals, but for our goals as well. The final one that I wanted to chat about is Simone Biles. Again, many people are familiar with her Tokyo 2020 events and stepping out of those events. It really changed the entire conversation about mental health among athletes and started a lot of really healthy conversations about it. The thing that I love about this is that it was built on this conversation of honesty. I was an assessment director during the pandemic, and a lot of institutions just stopped doing assessment because they were like, we don't know what's going on. We can't do anything. Some people doctored their assessment and they said, just do something. We need to have complete forms, do something. Our story when I was a director of assessment was just be honest. If the answer was, you didn't do this assignment because your world was falling apart, just write, we didn't do this assignment because our world was falling apart, because we want our assessment forms to reflect what was happening, not a story that we decided was going to be a good story before we started writing our assessment form. And that honesty is what guided us to really healthy assessment practices and really strong relationships with our faculty, because we would very comfortably say, oh, just write that the world was on fire. Just write that. That's fine. Because assessment should be taking the knowledge that we have, capturing it so other people can reflect on it. Again, don't cry for Simone. She came back, a little bit later, did small things like win the all-around and win the team. So she's fine. She's doing just great if anyone's concerned about Simone Biles. The thing that I really wanted to challenge you with before I close is this idea of thinking about assessment within your own programs as an Olympic moment. And if you were to tell that story, if you were to share that more publicly, what would that look like? What would people feel? How would you tell that story? What feelings would you want them to have as you told your assessment story? Would you want them to just be happy that you filled out the form? Which you should fill out the form because it makes other people happy. But that's not your purpose, it's just to fill out a form. So what do you want other people to feel when you tell them your assessment story or what's going on in your classroom? Do you want them to be excited, concerned, equally concerned with you? What do you want them to remember? What takeaways do you want them to remember? Do you want them to just remember who won and who didn't, who got gold, who got silver? Or do you want them to know how they participated and what that looked like for them? What that looked like for your program, how it shaped and shifted your students, how it encouraged new students from other areas to come into your program? An interesting question for me is thinking about the people on TV as they go through. I like watching the Olympics live, and then I like watching it again, because if you just watch it with the commentators, you know who's going to win, because all of a sudden they start talking about the hometown of this random person you never heard of, and then lo and behold, they're the ones who won, because they're about storytelling. So if we were replaying your assessment, what would that story be? If this was on the news, if your provost was talking about it, if your dean was talking about it, do they have a 30-second clip that they could give people to compel them, to get them excited? More importantly, is there a story that your students would connect to that they would tell someone else? Because that's when it really matters. And then finally, after they heard your story, what would they be compelled to do? And I think as you think about assessment and the way that you tell your story, it's incredibly important that you think about what your story compels other people to do, your faculty, your students, your institution, maybe even your field, because you're contributing to all of those larger stories. You've been incredibly kind just listening to me talk about the Olympics and almost bizarrely getting really emotional when talking about one of them. So I appreciate that. I care a lot about assessment and specifically people's ability to make that assessment matter in a broader space, because for too long it's been a perfunctory exercise that people need to complete, and it rips out the soul of what institutional effectiveness really is. And I think it's incredibly important that we as faculty members, as administrators, as people who are called on to tell the story of our institution, are comfortable and confident in recognizing what's necessary to make those stories truly matter. One of the things that I did bring, because I'm talking about the Olympics, is I brought all of you an Olympic gold medal. And so I encourage you to grab one for yourself. I bought quite a few. I also encourage you, if there is someone in your department that you think deserves an Olympic gold medal for academic excellence, that you grab one for them too, so that you can include them in this. And to put it somewhere just to remind yourself that it's not always about the medal, it's about the story behind the medal. It's not always about the assessment, it's about the story behind the assessment. It's not just about a report, it's about the students that we're writing reports for. Thank you so much for your time.